It's been so long I spoke on ZBrush and Blender, and I feel with all that is going on, this is the right time to place them side by side again. I get it. Most people keep wondering why a comparison video is important, and I think I've spent a lot of time explaining why I do that. And so without wasting any more time, let's roll. Most digital sculptors categorize remeshing and topology as beginner's nightmare. Truth is, even pros most often get lost in that environment. And that is why at the end of this video, I'm going to suggest some great YouTubers I've learned from over the years who can also help you or teach you understand remeshing and topology into details. I get it that people still complain about Maxon not making any big updates to ZRemesher ever since it took ZBrush over from Pixologic. Aside that particular complaint, I mean, we all are witness to Pixologic themselves not actually making any great updates to ZRemesher, right? Although the updates we've seen so far are towards performance improvement and enhanced control options, the most and last significant changes go as far back as 2023. Under Maxon, the pace of meaningful change has clearly been slow. The updates we've seen so far, which will be ZRemesher retry, keep polypaint, performance caching, I mean, these ones are real improvements, but they are not quality of life tweaks, not fundamental updates, right? They improve consistency and reliability, not capability. And that's where the frustration comes in. Anyways, now let's get back to our topic. When it comes to remeshing and topology, ZBrush and Blender take very different approaches. And understanding how each one behaves will actually save you tons of time and not confuse you. ZBrush is built for sculpting first and structure later. ZRemesher exists to turn messy, high-poly sculpts into a simplified, mostly even quad-based mesh. And in many cases, it does give you a clean enough base to subdivide further or export for UVs. That's the appeal. You sculpt really without thinking about topology and worry about structure later. There are quirks to this particular approach, and these quirks actually matter. And my biggest issue has always been topology predictability. Edge flow often comes out inconsistent, especially around joints, facial areas, and transitions between forms. Right. Hard surface creases and small corners can still come out jagged, even with settings or options like keep creases or polygroups. Now, these settings actually help, but they don't guarantee clean results, and that uncertainty is the real problem. ZBrush also struggles to produce animation-friendly topology, and I mean anybody in the industry would attest to this. You often get spiraling edge flow, weak facial loops, or layouts that technically work but are not ideal for deformation. At that point, you either manually fix the topology elsewhere or spend extra time tweaking guides, polygroups, and settings, hoping for a better result. That's not something you can always afford when deadlines are tight, right? This is why the frustration with Maxon is understandable. Performance improvement and caching are great updates or features to fix in, but they don't address these long-standing issues. Users have been asking for better controls and more predictable results for years. Okay, so beating around the bush with stability updates don't solve the core problem. Also, there are certain industry issues pending, right? Big issues, right? ZBrush users have for a long time relied on external tools for serious retopology work. Example will be Maya's Quad Draw, Blender's Retopo tools, TopoGun or similar apps, are still in the norm when animation ready topology will be a necessity in your work. ZRemesher was never designed to replace full manual retopo. It's a fast reconstruction meant to get you a usable mesh for further sculpting, subdivision, or projection, not clean facial loops, deformation-aware edge flow, or production safe topology. That limitation existed under Pixel Logic and it still unfortunately exists under Maxim. The introduction of the retopo brush in 2025-2026 is Maxim clearly acknowledging this gap. The idea was clear, or is clear: a curve-guided, more intentional topology workflow that keeps artists inside ZBrush longer instead of forcing exports into third-party apps. Right? In theory, it's the right direction. In practice, it still feels like an early-stage solution. It improves control, yes, that is true, but it does not yet replace quad draw or dedicated retopo tools in the character pipeline. And for me personally, if the stakes are higher, guess what? I always consider a third-party app. For beginners, trust me, this is where you might begin to dance your way into frustration. Right. ZBrush's overlapping systems, such as Dynamesh, ZRemesher, subdivisions, projections, now the new retopo brush, solve different problems. But ZBrush does a poor job explaining when each should be used. Right. That confusion isn't a user error at all. It's actually a UX problem that hasn't been looked at. And I hardly ever think it's going to be solved. Look, ZBrush is not in competition with any software. Stop giving us competitive updates that we don't need or doesn't fix problems we are complaining about. Right? We are paying for ZBrush now. So if Maxim is watching, just focus on solving problems and complaints from your users so everybody can be happy. Somebody might ask, so then why are you comparing with Blender? Right, it's because Blender is free. That's the honest truth. They are working very hard with limited resources and their community is super active. This is the very reason I seem to compare every DCC tool with Blender, because we all can see their growth as compared to some other softwares by Autodesk and other companies that actually cost hundreds and have not received updates in over 10 years now. Right. Okay, so let's discuss remeshing and topology in Blender as well. Now, remeshing and topology are a necessity in Blender also because 3D models from sculpting, scans, or dense meshes almost always need cleaner, more uniform structure before animation, rigging, or using games. And so Blender did their research and noticed you can't work effectively on a chaotic mesh. And so what did they do? They decided to introduce some tools to strengthen things up in their sculpting department. Tools like voxel remesher, quad remesher, which is an add-on, right? Quad remesher is an add-on. And manual retopo with shrink wrap or snapping are built for predictable, clean geometry that's ready for animation or further modeling. The challenge with this is you mostly need to plan your workflow more carefully, right? Remeshing and topology inside Blender are more precise. Now, these are just my personal takes, and I've been doing this almost all the time. And so if you have any counter arguments, no hard feelings. Just state them in the comment sections. And I know they would go a long way to help other users also. Voxel remesher in Blender is great for cleaning up messy geometry and keeping volumes consistent. It works really well, but like in ZBrush, if you remesh too often or at too low a resolution, it can erase fine details. Manual retopology in Blender is very straightforward and gives you full control over loop placement, which is essential for animation and deformation. It feels closer to what professional studios do with tools like Maya's Quad Draw. The trade-off is speed, Manual retopo is slower than ZBrush's automatic remesher. So you have to decide speed with less control or slower for precision, right? That's not a risk. It's actually a choice. That is why there is Octopo. I just had to be smart about it because I definitely know somebody would chip in Octopo, and so I just had to point Octopo out. Yeah, Octopo is a community tool which brings ZBrush style automation into Blender, and guess what? Those developers are really doing a great job. I've used it once and I liked it. Any issues with meshing and topology in Blender? Sure. Let's talk about the quad remesher. Right. Although it's a third-party tool, you most likely will find yourself using it one way or the other. It's slow and inconsistent, right? And one thing I noticed about that tool, it doesn't use Blender's own face set to guide topology. You can correct me if I'm wrong, and also it's been a while since that tool received some updates from its developers. Who knows? Maybe the developers are now into beer production. Hey, we might never be able to tell, right? Aside from the support Quad tried to bring in, remeshing in Blender can be painful sometimes, and that is usually due to hardware limitations. When working with very dense meshes, right, the software can freeze or become unresponsive during voxel remeshing or heavy quad remesher operations. I mean, I found myself sitting behind my computer hoping Blender would respond, but never. Blender often doesn't, and I always have to open Task Manager and kill it from there. Start all over again. It's not a good feeling, right? Another thing, as a beginner, I would beg you to really look into voxel remesher, quadriflow, and manual topology building. Doing so will save you a lot of time. Otherwise, you end up wasting hours producing one messy mesh after the other. I know most people would mention other optional tools for meshing and topology in Blender. Well, since those are separate or third-party add-ons, we still don't have an argument there. Sorry. Blender is still a work in progress, and so let's do well to admire it that way, right? I remember those days when you had to export meshes to other apps just to rebuild basic topology inside Blender. Man, also there were too many steps and external tools involved if you had to fix a meshy sculpt for UVs, animation, or rigging. And who remembers there was no automatic remesher? How time flies, right? Blender didn't have one, and so you had to rely heavily on decimation or manual cleanups. Man, difficult times. Now, Blender has come a long way. ZBrush wins if you want to sculpt fast, push insane details, and don't care about perfect topology right away. Right. Blender also wins if you need clean, animation-ready meshes and full control over every loop, speed or precision. Okay, let's talk about detail, workflow, and brush behavior. You don't really get to hear about this much, but it's something that is really or has really been bothering me on both tools. Hey, again, if there is any concern or objection, kindly leave them in the comment sections below. Also, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Let's continue. I don't know if I'm the only person concerned about brush behavior and detailing, but let me say this. Many sculpting tools look similar or play similar on paper, if that's the right word to use when it comes to detailing, but begin to take different parts when it comes to predictability. Now, detailing is one of ZBrush's main stronghold, and you can't find any better than that. This is actually where ZBrush built its reputation. Long before micro details became standard in games and films, we were already layering pores, wrinkles, scars, cloth, weave, and surface noise at extreme resolutions. The brush system was shaped by that demand, right? The brushes within ZBrush are not just deformation tools as other beginner sculpting tools may offer. I see those tools more of a behavior system, if that's the right word. They respond consistently no matter how dense a mesh becomes. And that level of consistency is what lets artists work intuitively instead of technically, right? So everybody can actually use the software regardless of how unbeginner friendly ZBrush might seem. Now, this is one major complaint I was shocked to come across on ZBrush's forum years ago. I don't know if ZBrush users still hold on to this thing I'm about to mention as an issue, but some dudes were complaining over detailing, right? And this was their take. Now that I'm actually thinking of it, I think it's beginning to make sense. Now, this is it. Because ZBrush handles density so well, artists often push surface details too early or too far. I think this should be one of those beginners' complaints, right? This is my take on that. Because the system is smooth and isn't demanding on hardware at initial stages, I mean, it's understandable that its users might want to push more details, thinking that it will give them the kind of realism they are looking for at such an early stage of production. That makes sense, but I don't get why it should be an issue. Maybe you are just watching the wrong tutorials, right? This is more of an artist problem than a software problem. Okay, most complaints from most forums I come across are mostly artist problem than a software problem. And so let's be guided, or else we end up beating around the bush and then don't find solutions to our problems. ZBrush gives you enormous power, but it does not protect you from poor artistic judgment. If you don't understand form hierarchy, ZBrush will happily let you bury bad structure under perfect pause. That was just by the way anyways, right? Just came through. My personal concern I would like to raise will be one, the learning curve. Very steep and confusing, and everybody's been complaining about it and nothing seemed to be done about it, right? This particular side of ZBrush doesn't care how many years of experience you have. Dude, you can get lost in workflow easily. You don't know when to use either Dynamesh or subdivision levels, and it's a major problem, especially if you want to maintain or preserve clean geometry through multiple detailing passes. Maybe my brain just doesn't have a good tracking system, right? There are other issues along this side, but I usually have my own workaround, so I wouldn't mention them. Okay. Others will be imported models not behaving properly when sculpting on them. I think this should be a major issue. You most likely would find yourself remeshing mid-workflow if you have a poorly distributed workflow. I don't know if I've said this, but I think I have to suggest some good ZBrush channels interested people can learn from, because most of these procedures demand you understand what you are doing to achieve the best result. So kindly check my description. I mean, I have two in mind right now. You can also add a few that you have learned from in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to pin them up to the top of the comment. Yeah, I think that would be all. So what about detailing in Blender? Right, what we spoke about was ZBrush. So what about Blender? Detailing in Blender, I think, is more cautious. Blender's brushes over the years have improved a lot. I mean, you get masking, face sets, and multi-res workflows, and these are tools that ensure clean layered details, right? They actually aim at pro level detailing, and it's a good thing. And I think Blender is one software that listens to its community and responds quickly. Now, building convincing surface works, especially for stylers and mid to high realism assets, is no more an issue in Blender. Except if your machine was put together on a low budget, right? At extreme resolutions, brushes start to feel less predictable. Not unusable, but it's more as if your machine is losing on some frame rate and refresh rates. Stroke responses can feel heavier, yeah, and fine details require more deliberate control. Your hardware begins to feel the weight of the project. And there is actually this big one issue. It's a big issue to me. And I can't tell if it's my eye that keeps deceiving me, but I don't drink alcohol. And so I doubt that. Sometimes I think the icon and brush behavior don't match. Let me know if you also go through such challenges or if it's an issue. Because look, I don't have time to be testing brushes and renaming tools to suit my way of work just so I can remember them in my own way. I don't have that time, right? Back in the days when I was young, really loved it, arranging and renaming, but now not anymore. It's too much work for me. It seems like some Christmas child game. So much unnecessary of work to do. Another thing is working on pores and skin textures with alpha brushes demands that you push subdivision extremely high, and that also impacts performance, right? Else you get low quality bumpy results in detailing. There are a few others I will skip because I know the Blender team keeps working on them, and there are so many channels out there that speaks concerning Blender updates and tweaks and tutorials and stuff, so I wouldn't waste time doing any of that. All I can say is Blender has come a long way, yes, and as much as these problems I have mentioned so far used to be worst, trust me, it's gone through some massive improvement over the years. So yeah, the only argument I can provide in favor of Blender to numb most of the issues will be their broader design. Blender is managing sculpting alongside shading systems, modifiers, and viewport updates. ZBrush is not. That difference becomes obvious when you are deep into tertiary and quaternary detail. I'm looking for a roundup to finally rank both softwares on this overall topic, but I can't seem to remember exactly where I placed ZBrush concerning detailing. And so I'm just going to talk about something else. Early look development and painting, I think, is highly misunderstood within this 3D space, especially by beginners. Early painting is not about PBR materials, perfect UVs, or final renders. I think newbies get ahead of themselves too early in the game, if that is the right thing to say. Most often than not, when I'm reading on people's issues on most sculpting forums, I just conclude people are either missing or skipping some steps, watching the wrong tutorials, or just aren't ready to put in the time and effort needed in the work they are doing. There are actually questions to answer while sculpting or before sculpting. Trust me, you should do that. It really helps. Questions on forms, normal forms. You should ask yourself if they read properly, right? Material separation is another thing to consider. Ask yourself if the separation makes sense, right? When you are close to done, sit back and ask yourself if what you are watching or what you have done feels believable at first glance. ZBrush has always treated this stage as part of sculpting itself. With poly paint, you can paint color directly onto the geometry without touching UVs. Now, this is very important than it sounds. With poly paint, you can block color, add variation, and test visual ideas while staying completely inside the sculpting mindset. For concept artists and character designers, this is efficient. You sculpt, you paint, you adjust forms based on color feedback, and you keep moving. The long-standing complaint is that poly paint is not real texturing. That is true, and it's still true as at the time of this recording, right? Polypaint does not replace a proper texture workflow. It is not PBR. It is not UV based by default, and it is not meant to be final. ZBrush assumes you will export that information later if you will need it. That assumption hasn't changed. For industry level PBR texturing, you should consider 3D Coat or Textura. Now, that's a good recommendation right there. Textura. 3D Coat has separated 3D Coat, Textura from 3D Coat. You should look into it. I think I have a video concerning it. Okay, let's do Blender. I think that is all I would have to say concerning ZBrush. Blender approaches early look development from a more production-aware angle. Sculpt and texture painting exists inside a system that already understands UVs, shaders, and materials. This makes Blender slower for pure ideation, but much smoother when ideas need to turn into assets. You can sculpt, paint, preview materials, and move towards final textures without changing software or rethinking your data. You know, previously, I used to complain that painting in Blender felt clunky and disconnected from sculpting. That complaint didn't last a year. Blender resolved it. The tools are more stable now, more predictable, more easier to understand, even for beginners. However, the trade-off is mental load. You are always slightly aware of the pipeline whilst working, even at early stages. Right. Okay, I'm done. But one last thing. If Maxim thinks ZBrush is king and so it needs less attention, well, Madbox says hi. Right. Who knew Madbox would become a ghost one day? But it did. Although people argue it's still a powerhouse, let's be serious in this bush. Right. It's dead. Madbox is dead. Maybe all I need to pray and hope for is that Autodesk or any big company out there doesn't buy Blender. That is number one. Or Blender doesn't put a price to it. Right, that would ruin a lot of things. Yeah, these are just my 2 cents. Hey, if you have any opposing view or anything you can add to anything that I said concerning any of the topics we did on Blender versus ZBrush, kindly feel free to leave them in the comment sections below. Also like, share, subscribe. My next video is going to be on 3D Coat versus Blender. Yeah, and it's going to follow like that. I'm going to be very consistent this time and be pushing more videos out there. And so if you also have any recommendation on any versus video or software you need me to look into, kindly leave it in the comment sections below. I'm going to be very engaging this time. Until my next video,